Friday the 13th Carnival of Maniacs, Chapter 12. One final document was all that stood between Nosferatu and freedom. He scanned the columns of cramped print, all the usual stuff about aforementioned parties of the third part as defined in subsection 3.2, before realizing he was hopelessly lost. He looked up and whined, "Where do I sign?" "Same as all the others," sighed Lieutenant Marshak, indicating the half-dozen forms Ross had already scratched his moniker on. "The line at the bottom of the page." The lieutenant and his officers, one female and one male, were doing their best not to laugh at Ferratu's ridiculous outfit. The singer had got the replica hockey mask pushed high up on his forehead, revealing a sweaty, bewildered face framed with the balaclava of latex. His features were made even more absurd by two panda rings of grease paint smeared around his eyes. Ross looked up at Vonda Coles, his attorney, and waited for her to give him the nod. Then he signed the sheet, dropped the pen on the table, and scraped back his chair. The room was so beige and formica, it was practically communist. Lieutenant Marshak picked up the Bell documents and started to go through them. Suddenly, he stopped on a page and smirked. "Something funny?" pounced Ross. The cop shook his head, cleared his throat, and continued checking the rest of the papers. "Go on," repeated the singer. "If you've got something to say, let's hear it." "Ross," said Vonda, placing a hand on his shoulder, "we're done here." Marshak looked up and addressed Coles directly. "The arraignment's set for the 20th. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," interrupted Ross. "You haven't answered my question. Is it my handwriting? Is it funnier than other rock stars?" The lieutenant shuffled with mock self-restraint. "Is it my name?" Ross persisted. "Does Dwayne Weintraub do it for you? Is that it?" One of the other cops began to snigger. "Well, no," replied Marshak hesitantly. "It's just that under occupation you put musician." Ross frowned. "So? What's so funny about that?" "Well, it's not that it's funny," Marshak explained, "but, well, you're not really a musician, are you?" "What the fuck?" Ross was dumbstruck. "Of course I am." "Well, no, you're not." Everything about the lieutenant stank of passive aggression. "You're more a celebrity." Ross looked at his attorney. "Can you believe what this man is saying?" "Let's just go," she said. "Naomi's waiting in the lobby." "Fuck, Vonda! It's bad enough these guys have just taken $50K off me, and now they're insulting me. Can they do that? I mean, legally?" "Come on," Marshak argued. "You don't play anything. You're just a singer." "That's where you're wrong, buddy," said Ross, turning from his attorney and jumping to his feet. "Well, I've never seen you play," ventured one of the other cops sheepishly. Ross kicked the chair. "What is going on here?" he shouted. "Are you guys blind or something? I play guitar on the TJ's Gone Wild video." It was the third cop who spoke now. "I've got a friend who plays guitar," she rattled, "and he says you definitely mimed in that video." "Your friend?" shrieked Ross. "Who gives a flying fucking shit about your friend?" "So go on then." The policewoman folded her arms as if digging in for a long battle. "How many hours a day do you practice?" "What the fuck does that have to do with anything?" "My friend's a musician," she persisted angrily. "A real musician. And he practices 4 hours a day." "Well, maybe he needs it." "So, you must take a lot of singing practice, huh?" cracked the same officer. The female officer was really digging in, but was only just now getting into her groove. "This puppy don't even write his own songs," she howled. "He's co-written, only 5% of his entire catalog." "What is it with you three?" Ross hollered. "Are you the new fucking LAPD Rapid Review Squad or something? A new show opens and you arm yourselves with typewriters?" Silence. "Now you listen," he shouted. "I've been to Ethiopia, okay? I've met starving children, and they worship me. So don't tell me I'm not a real fucking musician. Coles had heard just about enough. She grabbed Ross by the frayed sleeves of his burlap jacket and hauled him out into the lobby where his wife was buffing her nails. When Ross saw Jaomi, he broke into tears. God, he cried, rushing to embrace her. I thought I'd never see you again. It's only been an hour, she answered dryly. Those bastards, he wept. If you could have seen what they just did to me. Seriously, Jaomi. Forget Rodney King. It was worse. Vonda signed out at the front desk and called over to Ross. I'll send you my bill. Then she asked the duty sergeant if there was another way out of the building and smartly made her exit. Jaomi, on the other hand, led Ross to the front door where a rabid press pack was waiting. As soon as Ross stepped out, he was bombarded with questions and requests from photographers to look this way. The singer gawked disbelievingly at his wife. What's going on? They're here for you, hot stuff, she smiled. Your attack on Fenwell's been running all evening. You're shitting me. His tears dried instantly to be replaced by an expression of unbridled joy. Jaomi shook her head and laughed. You're big news, Ross. Rock and roll! He shouted. Then he pulled the hockey mask down over his face and without wasting another moment began to pose for the paparazzi. A journalist shoved a tape recorder under his nose. Mr. Ferrazzi, will you be apologizing to Catania Fenwell? Apologize? Laughed Ross. I've just sent her ratings through the roof. She's issued a statement, shouted another reporter, accusing you of being mentally unstable. Hey, Osama, Ross jeered. In case you haven't seen the news lately, the whole world's a carnival of maniacs. So who the hell will notice one more? The writing on the sign read Hunt Ridge 4. Just 4 more miles and Kyler would know whether or not Jason Voorhees was real. Logically, there was no guarantee the carnival had taken Sheriff Haslip's advice and gone to Hunt Ridge, nor was there any firm reason to believe that either Jason or Sawicki was actually riding with the carnival. And yet somehow Kyler knew, just like she knew she couldn't trust the man in the limo, that events were rapidly drawing to a conclusion. At the moment, however, she had a more immediate problem to contend with. How did Landau find out? She asked, slowing the Chrysler. What does it matter? Answered Tollison. If we don't turn back, you'll lose your job. You're the only person who knew, she said, keeping her eyes on the road. Maybe the sheriff. We never told him which office we're from. Anyway, why would he? As far as he's concerned, we're here on official business. But you did piss him off, suggested Tollison with an almost schoolyard levity. I don't buy that, Kyler fired back. While you were off hiding in the woods trying to get your cell to work, the sheriff and I came to an agreement. I was not hiding. Tollison was clearly offended by her not-so-veiled accusation. Is that when you phoned Landau? She pushed. Or had you already tipped him off before we left Corning? Tollison placed his back against the passenger door so that he could face his partner full on. Michelle, I swear, this has nothing to do with me. You've been opposed to this investigation from the start, she asserted almost as if interrogating a suspect. Only because it's insane, he protested. It's this crusade of yours. Landau's had it in for you for months. All these ghouls and zombies, they're killing your career. And now you're going to throw it all away because of a suspect who doesn't even exist. There has never been a definitive solution to the Voorhees murders, she answered. Between 1984 and 2003, Jason's death was reported on 9 separate occasions, and on each occasion, there was a series of murders that either started or ended in the Crystal Lake area, and each series used the same M.O. Then the witnesses got it wrong. A hint of impatience was creeping into Tollison's voice. Some of them were highly qualified medics, Kyler answered with equal impatience. They were wholly reliable. Okay, said Tollison. Then it's not Jason at all. It's a bunch of different people pretending to be Jason. Like that Roy guy, Roy Burns. Kyler rejected this out of hand. There's only one case on record of someone copying Jason, and that was Roy Burns in 1987. As she spoke, Tollison shook his head with increasing annoyance, until finally he'd heard enough. Every report describing Jason is different, he complained over the top of her. I told you I did my homework. One minute he's got a sack on his head, the next it's a hockey mask. One person says the mask cracked, another says there's no damage. And when they describe his face, they can't decide if he's rotted, melted, or fucking retarded. One girl says she can knock him down with a piece of wood, while some guys say not even a shotgun will stop him. All right! Kyler raised her voice just south of an actual shout. I admit there are some problems. Problems? Tollison couldn't believe the understatement. But that's my whole point, she tried to explain. There has never been a comprehensive explanation. I'm sorry, Kyler, Tollison said, easing off a little, but this is really starting to bother me. I don't want you to be pissed. Really, I don't. But maybe Landau has something. Maybe your judgment is foggy. But I just told you. You just told me you need a vacation, he sighed. Thanks, she said, her voice falling. Michelle, don't call me Michelle. She was still managing to remain calm. The same breathing techniques she used in combat were just as valuable in personal relationships. Kyler, look, if you could just... I don't understand why you're so determined not to see the obvious. She removed her right hand from the steering wheel and took a silver locket from around her neck. Then, without shifting her gaze from the road, she handed the pendant over to Tollison. I've spent my whole life searching for proof of life after death. Her partner delicately pressed the button that opened the trinket. I need to know if Jason is real, she continued. Tollison leaned forward and held the locket close to the soft light of the dash. In one side of the case was a photo of a woman holding a baby girl, while in the other was a lock of that same woman's hair. 20 years ago, said Kyler as her partner studied the locket, Jason Voorhees murdered a woman named Martha Kyler. Tollison went cold. That's right, said Kyler. Jason murdered my mother. The crowd clapped and cheered as Jason held Sparks and Vincenzo up in the air. The killer had straightened the first two fingers of his hands into V shapes, plunging the left V into Vincenzo's eyes and the right V into Sparks's. Then he stood erect on the boat dock and lifted the bleeding victims off their feet in a murderous victory salute. Now he waited until the showmen finally stopped pissing and shitting themselves and shook them off his hands. Vincenzo went crashing into the cabin wall, bringing the whole facade down on his head, while Sparks landed in a snap of broken wood that used to be a paddle. And still, Eli Brooks didn't think he was getting his money's worth. Turn it up, he shouted. We can't hear anything. Alice looked up from where she was kneeling on the ground. You fucking little bastard, she screamed. As she got up and started to rush toward Eli, every light in the carnival suddenly went out. The moon now held sway over Harper Field, and panic went running through the crowd like a virus. Jason grabbed the Camp Crystal Lake sign and broke one end off into a mess of splintered teeth. Then he dropped down among the audience and thrust the puncture board in and out of their meat bags, ravaging their faces, spilling their intestines, ending their lives, riding the horror like the charnel mongoloid reaper he was born to be. Judge ran to the generator that stood behind the huge 18-wheeler. The diesel engine was still grinding away, but he was appalled to see that someone had severed all the power cables. Suddenly, a sharp bang came from inside the trailer. Who's there? He called. The only answer he got was another loud crash. He picked up a wrench lying next to the generator and crept forward, the screams from the crowd adding impossible tension. I'm warning you! He counted to 3 before raising the tool and jumping in front of the open trailer doors. There was no one inside. Damn! He gasped. He turned to go back to the generator when Glow suddenly stabbed him through the stomach with her hunting knife. She laughed and came at him again and again, the sharp steel point cutting into his face, his chest, the hands he tried to shield himself with. He collapsed onto a sack of crates as she came tearing forward with laughter and the repeated downfall of the blade. Stabs of silver shining in the moonlight, snatching at his flesh until all life faded from his eyes. And then she stabbed him in the throat and laughed. Alice fought her way through the fleeing crowd. A couple of men with handguns tried to stop Jason, but managed only to wound and kill some of the other townsfolk. Everyone else was running for their vehicles, turning the far side of the field into a madhouse of horns, revving engines, and crumpled metal. Suddenly, a dead body hit the ground in front of her. It had been tossed through the air by Jason, who was using an iron railing from the Jack the Ripper display as a spear. Alice had to find a way to stop the maniac. The carnival was finished, but Jason was still her meal ticket. If only she could... Suddenly she saw the body of her father, and a tunnel of sadness drew her towards his horribly violated remains. She didn't know if she was emboldened by liquor or numbed by grief, but she had started to move towards him, towards the chaos, when she was spun around and punched in the mouth. "This is all your fault, you stupid bitch!" She collapsed onto the dirt and saw Kenton Freely standing over her. He had a gun in his hand. "You want to say goodbye to the old bastard?" he snarled. Then he hauled her up to her feet, slapped her across the face, and threw her down onto her father's body. Her hand fell on the window pane, wrapped around the dead man's head, and she screamed. Freely was out of control. "Suck George's dick," he ratted, pointing the gun at her, "and I'll let you live." "Are you fucking insane?" she cried. Tears were flooding down Alice's face, and her lips were thick with mucus. She could feel her father beneath her, and was suddenly overcome by remorse at all their wasted years. "Do it!" shouted Freely as the diesel store exploded. Clouds of flame 3 stories high rose behind the long storage truck. From short distance, the heat wave was so intense, Kenton had to look away, which was why he didn't see Jason standing right behind him. The cast iron spear was rammed into Kenton's sphincter, pushed up into his bowels, and then shoved out in a shower of droplets through his abdomen. He barely had time to scream before Jason took the pole in both hands and then hoisted his body up in the air like a banner. "Oh, for God's sake!" shrieked Kenton, the gun falling from his hands. "Please, help me! Alice, help me!" His limbs bobbed up and down, undulating with the killer's footsteps as Jason roamed unbound among the fleeing and the dead. "Please!" cried Freely, gargling with bloody tracheal asphyxiation. "Help me, Alice! Help me! Please!" Alice climbed dizzily to her feet and tried to make sense of what was going on. Then she saw Kenton impaled on the end of the spear like a trophy puppet, and laughed. "Alice!" he wailed. "Please, help me, for God's sake! Please!" There was only one round left in the revolver, and Jason was walking straight towards her. She took careful aim, and, "Oh, God!" she shot Kenton right in the balls. Jason halted. The slug had gone straight through into his enormous chest. Before tossing both the spear and Kenton onto the spreading fire, Freely screeched and yelped. He railed at every injustice he'd ever had to suffer at the hands of all those two-faced bastards who'd screwed up his life. People like Alice and her father. People like Jason. Kenton cursed every damn one of them as he writhed and blackened and dripped and melted and died. Alice's laughter grew even more hysterical and was threatening to spill over into madness. Jason was coming for her now, and she was completely and utterly defenseless. "Jason!" The killer stopped and looked to see who was calling him. Alice, too, managed to get a grip on her wits long enough to notice a short teenage girl standing in front of the raging fire. Backlicked by the flame, exultant in the havoc she'd caused, Glow raised the severed head high into the moonlight and beckoned Jason forward with her bloody knife. "That's it, Jason. Come on, be a good boy. Come to Mommy." Alice was sole witness to this incredible rendezvous, and, as the people of Hunt Ridge rushed and hollered every which way over Harper Field. She laughed with the needle-sharp dissonance of a woman slowly going insane. High above the midtown traffic, but shielded from the noise by the plate glass exterior, Nathaniel Morgus sat waiting at his desk. Each piece of furniture in his office cost more than most of his staff earned in a year. Combined, the decor and the ornaments evoked the high-contrast minimalism of a shark. Nathaniel Morgus was massive, and yet the place where he conducted his business was even bigger. He remained perfectly still in his high-back leather chair, his eyes focused on the elevator doors as they opened to admit his personal assistant. Her high heels rapped on the marble floor with mechanical obedience. "Thank you for being so prompt, Mrs. Jones," he said. She offered a curt bow, knowing that any unwarranted speech would be classed as impertinence. "I wonder," asked Morgus gently, "if you'd be so kind as to cast your mind back to a task I set you 5 years ago." Mrs. Jones immediately knew what her employer was referring to. The Crystal Lake Millennium Project, September 2000. "Precisely," he confirmed, sliding the word like a snake of spit across his fat tongue. "I was given to understand that your people had searched the entire Crystal Lake area. Correct?" She stared straight ahead like a military subordinate. "And if I'm not mistaken," Morgus continued, "you submitted a budget based on the deployment of state-of-the-art surveillance and detection technology. Isn't that so?" But of course he already knew the answer. "Correct," she repeated, not showing a hint of nervousness. In the absence of speech, the two of them could easily have been mistaken for the more tedious exhibits in Geistman's Carnival. "Then would you please care to explain how your 3-month search failed? I said failed to uncover a makeshift dwelling containing three bodies from the first tranche of the 1984 homicides, and B, a candlelit shrine possibly dedicated to Mrs. Pamela Voorhees?" For a fraction of a second, Mrs. Jones smoothed her lips together, and her face turned ashen. But she regained her composure so fast that no one but Morgus would have noticed she'd even lost it. "Crystal Lake," she began, "covers an area of hundreds of square miles." Morgus lifted his hand from under the desk and shot Mrs. Jones in the chest with a tidy steel revolver. Blood spilled onto her chin as she collapsed to the floor in a tangle of stiletto shoes and crisp black stockings. She grabbed at the bullet wound and began to cough uncontrollably, as the air pockets in her lungs were flooded with eternal pain. Morgus stood up and looked on dispassionately as the woman in the black pinstripe suit flailed around the floor like a squashed bug. Then he unloaded one of the remaining 5 shots into her face, and the other 4 into her breasts. Might as well mix business with pleasure. He contemplated the corpse for a moment before returning the gun to the top drawer of his desk. The smell of cordite drifted past his nostrils, reminding him of the 4th of July, childhood. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the hands-free button on his phone. "Is the tracking device still operational?" he asked. "Yes, Mr. Morgus," replied a female voice. "Good," he soothed, and then more vigorously, "Excellent. Mrs. Cardella, if you'd be so kind, would you please come up? I have some good news for you." "Yes, Mr. Morgus," she answered, trying to mask her fear. Morgus ended the call and looked out at the New York skyline. "Jason's alive," he hissed. "I can feel it. Don't disappoint me, Miss Kyler. Don't disappoint me." Tollison still couldn't bring himself to say anything. He just stared at the locket, at the photo of baby Kyler resting in her mother's arms. "She was 32 when she died," said Kyler matter-of-factly. "I was still in school." "Your father, Tollison began, "died of natural causes soon after I was born." Shit, Kyler, I'm sorry." Tollison closed the locket and handed it back. You still haven't told me about Landau, she said, replacing the pendant around her neck. How does he know I'm here? Oh, Christ, Kyler. Tollison's whole body bent inwards, as if he was trying to convey sincerity through contortion. I don't know what I can do to convince you, but I swear, I absolutely motherfucking swear, I had nothing to do with it. I did not tell Landau. Anyone else? She asked. I told no one. He was emphatic. Okay, I never wanted to come here. I admit that. And I'm real sorry about what happened to your mom. But Jason's dead, Kyler. He's gone. She took her foot off the gas and gently pushed on the brakes. What are you doing? He asked, turning his gaze on the dark, empty forest 2 miles outside Hunt Ridge. After my mother was murdered, Kyler said coldly, I swore I'd never let anything like that happen to me. I promised myself I'd never be a victim. I'd never let anyone use me or force me to do anything I don't want to. The car stopped dead on the side of the road, and she turned off the engine. Why have you stopped? He stuttered. I've built my whole life around that rule. Kyler turned and stared Tollison in the eye. No one gets in my way. No one. Understand? He nodded dumbly. His Adam's apple took one giant leap for mankind, followed by one colossal dive for cowardice. Kyler unfastened her seatbelt and started to get out of the vehicle. Wait! Called Tollison. What are you doing? Where are you going? You can't just walk out on me, Kyler! But Special Agent Kyler didn't respond. She just stood up on the grassy verge and slammed the door in her partner's face. Alice Whitney was drunk, terrified and heartbroken. Her father lay dead at her feet. The carnival vehicles were going up in smoke. She didn't know if any of the others were still alive, and now Jason, her only chance of a future, had turned his back on her and was walking out of her life. And with each step he took, the loss of everything she loved became more and more meaningless. You're not going anywhere, she shouted. She ran after him and tried to stop him, but he brushed her aside like the insubstantial and irrelevant victim she was. Good boy, Jason, smiled Glow, extending her arms in maternal embrace. She's just a slut. She can't harm you. No one can. Now come to Mommy. No! Screamed Alice, scrabbling to her feet. You're all I've got, you murdering fucking bastard! She rushed forward and jumped on his back, trying to pull him down. But he threw her over his head, and she landed face down on the compacted soil. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and she was sure she'd broken a couple of ribs. Worse, she now lay helpless in front of the crazy blonde girl, who she now realized was carrying a severed head. Glow cackled, triumphant in the full moon. That's it, Jason, she yelled ecstatically. Mommy's here. Come give Mommy a great, big hug. Alice looked on as, at long last, Pamela Voorhees was about to be reunited with her son. But her fascination turned to horror when Jason pulled back his arm and punched Glow's head clean off her shoulders. Blood pumped through the girl's open neck like a geyser. It sprayed into the air, squirted across Jason's white mask, and poured deep red rain all over Alice. The teenager was still smiling when her head hit the grass, but her body fought against this impossible replay of the night. 25 years ago, when Pamela Voorhees was beheaded on the sands of Crystal Lake. The decapitated corpse lashed out at Jason, slashing blindly with the hunting knife, before faltering and then collapsing at his feet. The severed head slipped from her fingers with slaughterhouse finality. Just 10 minutes had passed since Jason's reawakening, and the Carnival of Terrors was all but destroyed. And this has been Friday the 13th, Carnival of Maniacs, Chapter 12. Jason's awake and on the rampage, folks. And that was not the family reunion that I was expecting. I just had this vision in my head after I read that he punched Glow's head off, that he would take the severed head and try to put it onto Glow's neck stub. So, who knows, that might happen later. I don't know. I haven't read ahead yet. Anyways, guys, let me know what you thought of tonight's upload, what you think of the book so far, how you feel about tonight's chapter moving forward with the story, and I'll be back very soon with more of Friday the 13th Carnival of Maniacs. Till next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.